Walking Dead has seen some immense success in recent years. We've had some of the best shows The Walking Dead ever made, mixed with some of the worst games they've ever made. So what's next for The Walking Dead? Well, let's recap. In 2023, The Walking Dead had a pretty horrendous year when it came to game releases, and no game sticks out quite as much as the catastrophic The Walking Dead Destinies. I feel like The Walking Dead Destinies had so much potential if they were able to capture the same magic the Telltale games did, which is of course what they were trying to emulate. However, Destinies was plagued with bugs, horrendous gameplay, and problems everywhere. For example, there were no moving cutscenes, just still images on the screen and a panning camera, which felt like a very budget decision to make. It's 2024 and they certainly had the budget to give us a great The Walking Dead game, but Destinies just completely missed the mark. If you compare Destinies to even the worst point in Telltale games, the story is undeniably worse. I personally believe Destinies could have been a good game because it would have let you drive the narrative of the show, but I think they should have outsourced or potentially even contracted Telltale to come back and make another Walking Dead game. But Destinies wasn't the only Walking Dead game we got last year, as we had probably the most elusive game about The Walking Dead by the name of Walking Dead Betrayal. Now, you would be excused if you had no idea what I was talking about, since this game was delisted only 3 months after its release, and this is because, well, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. The game actually had a really good concept. It had this almost social ladder element to it, where you had to work with 7 other people in order to survive. However, you could also be the villain of the story and backstab your friends to succeed. The concept was exceptional, so why did it fail? Well, they just didn't market the game. Skybound had designed a game with a really fun concept, good graphics, a good map, and yet they decided that they would just not market it. I assume the developers thought that the name of The Walking Dead would carry the game and make people talk about it, but at the game's peak, it could take up to 9 hours to even find a lobby. I really do not think they should have delisted the game. I think they should have invested in marketing the game, and that would have brought a new influx of players into it, but alas, they decided that that was not worth their time, so they just delisted it. So with those 2 horrendous games, surely the Walking Dead games are all doom and gloom and they'll give up soon. Well, actually no, since it was recently announced that Skybound were partnering up with Bloober Team to make a brand new The Walking Dead game. Now this is a huge deal, since Bloober Team are known for making some pretty well-known horror titles, and one of these titles could potentially be the biggest horror game of the year, and that's the Silent Hill 2 remake. What does this mean for the upcoming game? Well, it could be one of 2 things. We could be about to get a terrifying VR experience from Bloober Team that builds upon Saints and Sinners with a couple more horror elements, or we could be about to get an entirely standalone The Walking Dead horror game. Personally, I love Saints and Sinners, but I would love to see The Walking Dead create a horror game akin to something like Resident Evil, since I do think there is the potential for a game like this with The Walking Dead name behind it to do really quite well. I just hope that they don't make a low budget game that cuts out things that would have made the game better. Also, please make it open world. The most exciting part of this is that Bloober develop all their games in Unreal 5, so it could look amazing, but at the same time, The Walking Dead Destinies was also developed in Unreal 5, so it's going to be hit or miss. Or I could be completely wrong, it has nothing to do with The Walking Dead, but I'm hoping. The Walking Dead have not released any new comics in the last year besides The Walking Dead Deluxe, which is predominantly a version of The Walking Dead but with color. It is selling, that's for certain, and I do think it's a good entry point for the fan base into the comics if you were interested in that. But let's talk about Clementine. This short series of graphic novels has actually turned out to be not as good as I think everyone really expected. I read through a couple of them briefly, but there are just some things that really don't make much sense. The art is great, but sometimes it can be a bit hard to figure out what is going on. The story's okay, but some of the decisions Clementine makes seem very out of character. And I think the books did have a lot of potential, but they aren't really capturing why everyone loved Clementine. For those who have never played the Telltale games, they are pretty interesting books. But for those who did play the games, they kind of missed the mark a little bit. These books are aimed at people who are 14 to 18 years old, so it's a considerably younger demographic. To go on a bit of a tangent quickly, it's very bizarre to me they decided to target this at that younger demographic. The last Walking Dead game involving Clementine came out March of 2019. Meaning that their target demographic were 9 to 13 at the time, and most likely weren't playing the Telltale games, since the first Telltale The Walking Dead game came out in 2012, when their target demographic was only 2 to 6. It just seems like a very bizarre approach for the novels to not be targeted at people who played the game series when they were younger. But anyway, now we just have to wait for the 3rd book, which is due to come out later this year. Whether it will be a great episodic finale or whether it will leave a sour taste in readers' mouths will have to be decided when they do eventually finish this series. Now, the moment everyone's been waiting for, the spin-offs, and also where I believe The Walking Dead needs to go next. So spoilers ahead, you have me more. Let's start with Dead City. Now, of all of the 3 shows that have come out, Dead City is definitely the worst. I'll try my best to avoid spoilers, but the narrative being built between Negan and Maggie really just doesn't make any sense. Some of the characters feel a bit like basic and a bit bland, and the lack of variance is really quite infuriating. They did this immense reveal at the end of The Walking Dead with the reveal of these variant walkers, and this was a massive deal. However, now it feels like they aren't a big deal, and they don't really exist again. I want to see an insanely mutated walker, one that will lead other walkers or who will sprint towards the survivors similarly to zombies in World War Z. But they just missed that mark yet again. The Rat King was a very cool addition, but imagine if that had just been a giant walker, or perhaps even a variant. area. Or imagine when they are stuck in Madison Square Garden, there are walkers that can jump straight over the fence. Dead City is not bad. Visually it's stunning and a lot of the action is fine, and an improvement on what had become the norm for The Walking Dead. But there were so many parts that felt a bit dull or a little bit boring to watch, a little bit tedious. Dead City is a must-watch, but I would probably compare it to season 6 and 7 of The Walking Dead, where there's not much happening, but it's good. I also think the growing dynamic between Herschel and Negan may cause Maggie to rethink how she views Negan, and I think this would be a bit of a detriment. Now, let's talk about Daryl Dixon, and this is a great spin-off. Arguably the best thing The Walking Dead made in years. Daryl Dixon has gritty, bloody violence, but with some of the best storytelling within The Walking Dead. Amazing set pieces, variants, and of course Daryl Dixon being a badass. Oh, and French Jesus. Daryl Dixon is by far the best show they have released at this point, probably since season 2 of The Walking Dead. I love how they use variants in this and how some of the variants are genuinely chilling and terrifying. This is what The Walking Dead needs. It needs these fresh faces. And with Rick Grimes now essentially retired within The Walking Dead, I feel like they have so much potential to make Daryl Dixon that main man, that figurehead as such. And Norman Reedus has told us time and time again he wants to do that. He wants to continue the story of this character. Personally, I hope Daryl Dixon gets another 5 seasons. I think this show has a real long haul potential to be more like Fear the Walking Dead, so just keep making this. This is good. And now what everyone was probably the most excited for, The Ones Who Live. This is my favorite spin-off of the 3. I think The Ones Who Live really summed up and finished Rick's story in the best possible way. Sure, again, there were no variants, but there was this army-style friction and fighting that we don't really see much anymore since the Commonwealth and World Beyond. I think they did miss some opportunities, such as bringing in Hope or really anyone from World Beyond. I honestly expected to see Silas at some point, since his ending in World Beyond hasn't been CRM armor. However, I guess now he's dead? I don't know. I think the casting for Major General Beale was perfect, and I think Jade just had a decent enough ending for her character. And the ending of the final episode is the first time The Walking Dead has genuinely brought a tear to my eye without killing off a character. I loved all the references back to older episodes of The Walking Dead. I'm glad they remembered to use Carl, and his legacy is a motivating factor for Rick. And I'm glad they got rid of his hand in homage to the comics. The second I saw the handcuff around him, I instantly knew they were going to chop off his hand. I think the smartest thing now that Ones Who Live has ended is to make a Judith spinoff. I think a Judith spinoff would be a great thing, or they do a completely different approach, which is what I'll discuss now. Where do they go next? Well, that's the question. On one hand, they could do Dead City Season 2 and Daryl Dixon Book of Carol and then just end the story. However, I want Daryl to be the one looking for a cure for the walkers, or looking for some kind of preventative measure. I think they should have Daryl and Carol exploring the world looking for some kind of cure. I think if they do season 3 of the show, it should take place in the UK as opposed to Paris, and I believe that after that they will go to other places. Dead City probably won't get a 3rd season, unless the 2nd season does break box office records. I just don't think there is as much demand for Dead City as there is for Daryl Dixon, and that's not because the show is bad, but rather the characters have kind of already wrapped up their story. But what about other spin-offs? Well, this is the challenge. They cannot do an Alexandria spin-off without a big budget, as they actually tore down the physical location they used for Alexandria at the end of the mainline show. However, that isn't to say they could not do a spin-off into Commonwealth. I think a Judith spin-off would be amazing and could capture some of the same emotions we get from Clementine in the Telltale games. And I think a Judith spin-off would likely involve other people within Alexandria, such as Aaron or Gabriel. I want to see a spin-off of King Ezekiel, but more specifically a prequel. Imagine a show called The Walking Dead: The King. I think this show could primarily revolve around Ezekiel rescuing Shiva, finding the kingdom, and kind of building that all up but until the saviors arrive. That could be a really interesting concept. I also think they could do some alternate reality shows. What do I mean by that? Well, I think they would have the potential to do shows with characters who are dead. For example, a show following the story of Carl and being more closely connected to the comics. And the benefit of alternate reality is they could recast Chandler Riggs. Not that I want them to, but they could. I don't know if they would do this, I just think it'd be kind of cool to see this. I think The Walking Dead needs another long-running show to stay relevant, but I do believe that Daryl Dixon will be that new long-running show. I don't think Carol will appear in every season, since Melissa McBride has said she wants to have a bit of a break from the character. But I'm glad she'll be reappearing in season 2. I'm very hopeful they do more shows with the Civic Republic, especially now that the CRM has disbanded. I think they could potentially do a show which follows the aftermath of this and have it be entirely new characters, entirely new locations, and more. Also, we need more variants. Give me a walker that picks up and uses a gun. I feel like variants were introduced and then became a bit of a side plot for most of these shows. That makes sense given they are mutations that take time to develop. But I think the future of The Walking Dead will be much more World War Z-esque. I want to see The Walking Dead continue. I love this show, I love this franchise. And I think it does have that potential, but it just needs to keep going now with Daryl Dixon. San Diego Comic-Con is on July 24th of this year, and I'm certain we'll see a lot more then. So let's hope this ages well.